Welcome, everybody who is just coming in. It's great to see you all. Thanks for being here. We'll give it a few minutes before we get started. We're a couple minutes before 3 o'clock here, but just wanted to allow people to begin getting into the virtual room here. Welcome. If you would, go ahead and click on the chat box there in your Zoom bar, and always love to see where people are coming from. So if you just type your name, if you want to share your school or organization, and then geographically where you're coming from. We tend to get a lot of folks from New Jersey, but also New York, and PA, and other areas of the country. So would love to just see where people are coming from today. And thanks again for being here. All right, looks like we got some folks from Morristown, right around the corner from one of our offices at Good Grief. West Orange, awesome. Edison, Hackettstown, Watchung, Linden, awesome. Lots of New Jersey folks so far. This is great. Welcome, everybody. Some folks coming from Trenton, Hopewell, excellent. Jersey City, East Hanover, Morristown. They're coming fast. Lots of folks here today. This is great. Welcome, everybody. So glad that you're here. Tewksbury, great. Seeing a couple of familiar names in the chat. Welcome. Those who are returning and those who are new. If you're just joining us, we are just giving it a couple minutes before we get started. And if you would, just type your name and where you're coming from geographically, but also if you want to share your school or organization. Always fun to see where people are joining us from today. All right, awesome. This is great. We got people coming from all over. Chatham, Roosevelt, awesome. Cape May, this is great. Welcome, everybody. Just give it another minute or two before we get started here to let more people join. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to this webinar on being present, mindfulness practices with children. My name is Jesse Bassett, and I am the Director of Education at Good Grief. I am joined today by Dr. Trevor Buser, who I'm going to formally introduce here in a minute, but just a few logistics before I do that. Today, we're going to explore a topic that in many ways has never been more relevant or more important in the lives of our students in schools. This past year has been filled with a lot of stress, a lot of loss, and a lot of adversity for all. So I am thrilled that we can provide you with this resource to integrate some strategies around mindfulness into your professional work. A few logistics on the front end here. Today's webinar is being recorded. We are going to upload the webinar to our YouTube channel so that you can reference back to it or share it with others in your network. As this is Dr. Buser's content, we ask that you don't reproduce it or redistribute it as a training without reaching out to Trevor directly, just to make sure that we protect his content. So thank you for doing that. We will be doing questions at the end, and Trevor will be pausing periodically to check in and answer questions as well. So feel free to put questions into the Q&A box. As you are probably all observing, The chat box moves very quickly, and sometimes it's easy to lose track of questions. The Q&A box is a much better space for us to keep track of all of those questions and make sure that we do our best to get to you. If we don't get to one of your questions, please don't take that personally. We've got a big group today, which is great. We're excited about that, but it will obviously limit our ability to get to all the questions that might be asked. But we will be providing contact information as a follow-up. If you have a question for us or a question for Trevor following today's session. A couple of other things. You will be receiving a certificate after this session. Those will be distributed tomorrow via email with the recording. You'll also get handouts from this session and a PDF of the presentation as well. All of that, again, is going to be sent in an email following the session today and should land in your inboxes tomorrow. So for those who are new to Good Grief, we're a New Jersey-based nonprofit whose mission is to build resilience in children, strengthen families, and empower communities to grow from loss and adversity. Our work since 2004 has been centered on supporting the needs of grieving children and families after the death of a family member. But it also extends to education and programming in places like schools. And this webinar today is brought to you by our Good Grief Schools program. In recent years, our work has expanded into the school setting where we are providing training and programs to faculty and students that is focused on building resilience through loss and adversity. The 4 components on our program that you see on the screen there represent our program offerings, including grief support groups for students who've experienced the death of an important person in their life, a social and emotional learning program called Roots to Resilience, focused on teaching adaptive life skills, and parent and professional workshops to provide education on grief and trauma-informed care. So if you want to learn more about Good Grief in our programs, I encourage you to check out our website, good-grief.org. And I will link out into the chat our Good Grief Schools page in particular. Encourage you to check that out. All right, so welcome, Dr. Buser. It's great to have you here. Dr. Trevor Buser is an associate professor of mindfulness-based counseling at Naropa University. He is also a licensed professional counselor and a certified school counselor. Dr. Buser has authored over 30 publications on topics including mindfulness and counseling, and he presents regularly at national conferences in the mental health field. On a personal note, Dr. Buser has been a consultant and a project collaborator with me in putting together a research study to evaluate our Roots to Resilience program here at Good Grief. And that study is actually formally underway right now with one of our school partners in New Jersey. So I am just personally really grateful that you're here. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation and for presenting today. And I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me today and for this invitation to join you for this webinar. I'm so happy to talk with you today to talk about mindfulness practices with children. There's been a lot of attention and research on mindfulness practices with adults, but much less research in terms of understanding and practicing mindfulness with children. So let me go ahead and I'm going to enter full screen and sharing my screen. And basically in this presentation, I'd like to spend some time in the opening slides addressing the what and why of mindfulness with children. And then we're actually going to do a lot of these practices, the how together later in the presentation. And I think that we'll have some good times together doing that. So I think this is a really important and, as Jesse said, very timely topic for us to consider. As you may know, in elementary schools, there's a lot of interest in social emotional learning programs, but specifically, I'm noticing a huge appetite for SEL programs that feature mindfulness. So that's going to be our focus. And I wanted to start today in a way that might surprise you. I wanted to start this presentation on mindfulness with a math problem for you all. And I'd like you to think about this problem, but not express your answer to us. So this is one of the few times I'm going to ask you to keep your answer to yourself. So there's no need to write your answer to this math problem in the chat bar. So let me go ahead and advance to this problem. You can all take a moment. I'll read it out loud. There are 26 sheep and 10 goats on a ship. How old is the captain? So we'll see if you can take a moment and come up with the answer. So one of the reasons why I asked that you not share your answers, because it's, as I'm sure you notice, a nonsensical question. There's no information provided here on the captain's age, but in a research study by Kami and Lewis, this math problem was given to second grade students. And what they found was that 88% of the students, the vast majority of students in the class, said the answer was 36. Obviously adding together 26 and 10 to arrive at this number of 36 years old. And as the researchers noted in this study, not one student commented that the question did not make sense, although the class averaged in the 85th percentile on their standardized tests. So the first point I wanted to make today, before I begin gathering your ideas about the meaning of mindfulness, is just how easy it is for children and adults to go through the activities of our day with little attention, more of a mindless state, going through the motions, what authors call running on autopilot. So I would like to take advantage of the wisdom in this group that has gathered today and tap that wisdom as we get underway together. What is mindfulness? I want to pause here, collect some of your ideas. Please put a thought for us on the chat board. Mindfulness is very mainstream these days. If you had to put mindfulness in your own words, what would you say? And of course, there's no one right answer that we're looking for, just interested in how you would describe this, how you would define this word, mindfulness, in your own way. And we'll take some moments here. Jesse, if you can help me.
Sure.
I don't have a great visual on the chat board while I'm sharing my screen. So if you can help just calling out some of the language that you're seeing in the chat board, I'd love to
Yeah,
hear.
I'm seeing some common themes. Being present is one that's coming through a lot. Paying attention on purpose, being aware, and variations on awareness. Focus is another buzzword that's coming through. Being centered. Being seems to be a word that is used repeatedly with being centered, being focused, being present, being aware of the moment, grounding yourself, present and aware, paying attention. Those seem to be the most kind of prevalent themes, feeling in the moment.
I love all of those descriptors. They certainly resonate for me in terms of my understanding of mindfulness. I appreciate the theme that we're seeing develop around that word being, around awareness. Sometimes we even just refer to mindfulness as focus when we're working with children. So we'll talk more about that. You know, it's very interesting in that study that I just mentioned, where they gave that math problem to second graders. They also gave the same math problem to a group of students who had been trained in mindfulness, who had gone through a mindfulness education program at the school, where they were learning just what you're saying, awareness, focus, learning how to slow down and just be in the moment. And with that class, when they gave them that nonsensical math problem, a third of the students actually questioned the problem and said that it made no sense. So actually a much better outcome in that particular study for the group that had been exposed to these ways of being that we're addressing today. So I'm going to weigh in as well with some ideas on how we can just define our terms as we get underway. Mindfulness, as you may know, is often associated with Buddhist meditative traditions. That's one of the reasons why I decided to take this position at Naropa University, which is one of the few Buddhist-inspired universities in the country. I would say, though, that mindfulness certainly has conceptual overlap with practices from other religions and other spiritual traditions. And mindfulness is understood as a state of consciousness supported by these meditative practices. Someone in the chat bar said, paying attention on purpose. And I think this is one of the best known definitions by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's the pioneer of mindfulness-based stress reduction, you might know, out of UMass. He defined mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And there are two main features in that definition that I'd like to highlight for our purposes today. First of all, mindfulness, as you all were saying, is about focus on our current experience, this present moment. So rather than our tendency to get wrapped in regrets about the past or worries about the future, mindfulness is about returning our attention again and again and again to this present experience. I don't know about you, but when I rest my head on the pillow to go to bed at night, it's like my to-do list for tomorrow immediately springs to mind. And I start thinking, I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And I start drafting emails in my head. I'm totally engrossed in these future plans. And then suddenly I remember, wait a second, I'm here in bed. I'm not at my desk typing an email. I'm actually trying to go to sleep for the night. I'm trying to rest. And so I take a moment to return my attention to that present moment. Now, I was reading an article not long ago about Nick Saban, coach of the University of Alabama football team, and how he always tells his players, be where your feet are. That's the way he reminds them to stay present. The second feature of mindfulness in the Kabat-Zinn definition has to do with this attitudinal quality. It's not just attending to the present, but it has to do with how we attend to the present. And Kabat-Zinn was using that word non-judgmental. And as I reflect on that word non-judgmental, I think rather than our knee-jerk reactions of pushing away anything in our experience that seems unpleasant, and our knee-jerk reaction of pulling in anything that feels comfortable, pleasurable, mindfulness is about attending non-judgmentally to this here and now experience. It's about practicing an openness to our experience, approaching it with curiosity. And this is why authors have sometimes said that mindfulness is like welcoming all of your present experience like a guest, whether pleasant or painful. We might decide eventually to intervene on this current experience and modify it in some way. But a first step of mindfulness is about opening to it so that we can really see it, so that we can explore it. Tara Brach says it's something like wrapping the present moment in radical acceptance. This is what is already here. So we might as well take a close look at it and see if we can understand it. So this is another spot in the presentation where I'd really love to gather some of your ideas. Obviously, you're here today because many of you are interested in more and more integration of mindfulness in school environments. Others might be here thinking about the use of mindfulness with children in other settings. But the question I wanted to pose to you is, what does mindfulness have to do with education? Why would we spend valuable time in our schools to practice mindfulness with children? So I wanted to give you some time to share your thoughts. I'm going to borrow Jesse's help again on the chat board. We can hear some of the themes coming up. Feel free to put your ideas. We won't be able probably to read all of the responses, but we do want to make sure we hear from you and express some of your ideas here.
So I'm seeing a few themes coming up already. One around self-regulation, so learning awareness and self-regulation. show acceptance and openness between students and teachers. So many messages are bombarding our children for their attention.
Mm.
Stress reduction practice, helping them focus. The practice of observation, helping them to focus on the current lesson, what might be taught. A strategy for developing student resilience, to learn self-awareness and reduce stress, build coping, to find calm, help with focus. Many of our children, here's a comment, many of our children just go through the motions. They're not truly aware of what they're doing. So I'm seeing a lot of themes on focus, regulation, reducing stress, being present. Coping skills, makes them better learners. Yeah, I think those are the main themes that are coming up.
Thank you, Jesse. That's really helpful to hear your summary. And I agree. I think what's interesting here and what we're seeing in the chat board is a bridge between the social emotional and the academic outcomes. Certainly those self-regulation aspects that are being mentioned, learning how to calm oneself, learning how to develop what we might call emotional intelligence, being aware, for instance, of the feelings that are arising of our current social situation. Another important piece of self-awareness, social awareness, but then also we're hearing about that application, that impact on the academic outcomes as well, in terms of being able to hold attention, focus attention on the task at hand in the school setting, which of course would be paramount. So let me go ahead and I'm going to also share some ideas. And around this question, I'm going to focus on the domains of social emotional learning identified by CASEL, Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And I've listed some of their domains on this slide. Self-awareness has to do with identifying one's thoughts and feelings, how behaviors are connected with our thoughts and feelings. Also, how children understand their own selves, or what's sometimes called self-representations, which children are capable of forming in early childhood. If we think about it from a developmental lens, I myself have a 7-year-old son, and it's very interesting to watch how he's coming to understand himself at this early age. There was an exercise I came across for children called an affirmation list. And in this exercise, the parent and the child over time come up with 100 positive qualities about the child. And so I was asking him, what are some positive things about you? And we were jotting them down on our list. And he talked about how he loves cars and how he's really fast at running and how he likes to make faces. And he said, I'm also kind of dramatic, but I like that. And even at this age of 7, he was saying that he knows his friend wants to be a chef and he wants to either be a police officer or a teacher. So to me, it makes sense that since children are beginning to develop these self-representations, that we can add alongside our work with children these practices in mindfulness to help support that awareness of self and deepen that awareness of self. Self-management refers to a child's ability to regulate their thoughts or emotions. You all were speaking to this self-regulation in the chat board. At times, we all need, and children need, to exercise some control over how they're feeling. And this domain, self-management, also picks up those themes around focus and attention that you all were naming. Social awareness, we want students, of course, to learn to take the perspective of others. Developmental scholars talk about egocentrism being part of early childhood, having difficulties actually taking the perspective of others. So mindfulness is one way that we can help them tap into that empathy, develop that social awareness where they're exhibiting pro-social behaviors in the classroom so that they can work well with their peers and also work well with teachers. And I believe, in looking at the research literature, even though it's limited around studies involving children, I believe that mindfulness, we can see in research studies, is very supportive of these domains. In terms of self-awareness, this is precisely what we're doing when we practice mindfulness. We're intentionally helping students slow down, register awareness of their context, register awareness of what's happening inside their own skin, their emotions, somatic awareness of their sensations. And a lot of the exercises that we're going to be practicing together today are about helping children repeatedly take a moment and check in with their current experience, really developing that self-awareness. I included at the bottom of this slide a quote from a student aged 11. And this student named Annie says, "Last year, when there was something I didn't know, I would pretend to get a drink of water or go to the bathroom to try not to answer it. But I think mindfulness has made me more confident. Instead of just backing away, it's helped me face down those fears, and that's been really helpful." What incredible self-awareness from an 11-year-old, aware of patterns of behavior associated with patterns of emotion like fear, and then with mindfulness, wish that we all could have this kind of resourcefulness, able to face down our fears and do something new, do something different. And I wanted to highlight a very compelling study, this one by Napoli and colleagues. They actually did a randomized controlled study with first through third graders. The experimental group received mindfulness training over a 6-month period. Control group didn't receive mindfulness, but did a reading task instead. And the researchers found significant improvements for the mindfulness group of children in their attention skills and also in teacher ratings of students' attention and social skills. Similar findings I've mentioned reference here by Schonert, very similar findings reached in another study by them. So there's growing evidence that mindfulness is associated with these social emotional learning domains in children. And we know from the research literature that those domains, those SEL domains in turn, are correlated with higher levels of academic success, achievement scores, behavioral outcomes like positive attitudes to school, and also less school avoidance. So really important outcomes that we can link up with these mindfulness practices. So at the start of the presentation, I promised that we'd have a little bit of fun together doing some of these mindfulness practices for children. And what I'd like to do is actually give some general recommendations on mindfulness practice with children, and then we'll get into the practice together so that we can have some firsthand exposure to these practices. It's always important, and this is something that I really emphasize in the trainings that I've been providing in local schools. It's really important that we ourselves have that firsthand engagement and practice understanding of mindfulness before we try to offer that to someone else, including our students. And so today we'll get some additional exposure and we'll look at some ways that we can continue our practice so that it's very much grounded in our own authentic experience as we share this with others. So a couple points that I wanted to mention as we transition here to the experiential component. The first point is that when we're introducing mindfulness to children, part of our task is developing a shared language about mindfulness with the children. I've been in and out of a lot of the local schools having this opportunity to work with teachers around mindfulness practices. And I often start with children the same way that I started with all of you, asking them, what is mindfulness? And typically several of the students have heard of it. And I love the words that they come up with. One first grader just called mindfulness, as you see on the slide here, cooling my engines. And that became our anchor point for the class, our reference point for how we talked about it. So we'd have some conversations, when we start to feel upset, how can we cool our engines for a moment? And as one author said, we don't even have to call it mindfulness. We can call it presence. One of you called it focusing. Some people call it taking a time in. You might just simply call it paying attention to what's happening now. So whatever it might be, important that we build that mindfulness vocabulary with students that helps cue and remind students that we're stepping into this practice, that we're accessing this resource. And obviously, the younger the student, the simpler the terms that we want to use. But we shouldn't underestimate the level of discourse that elementary aged children, especially in late childhood, are capable of bringing. So on this next slide, I wanted to just share with you these quotes that I'm sharing with you today are from a book called Teach, Breathe, Learn. This was a student age 11, said, mindfulness for me means when you act in the right, thoughtful way. When you're aware of all the things that you do, and you have to be cool with yourself and be calm. When you're angry, you have to understand why you're angry. Another student, age 10, mindfulness is thinking before reacting. Means something to me because it reduces stress. I read those and I thought an adult could have said these things. And if I were working with these students, I'd want to lean on their words and use them moving forward. I like that, being cool with yourself. I might ask them, what's that like to feel cool with yourself? How do you know it in your body when you're cool with yourself? Start really drawing that out with them. So in a moment, we're going to dive into these experiential practices together. You can also pause and see if any questions are coming in as we make this transition. But before we do on this slide, let me just give you some general recommendations that I hold in mind when I'm doing mindfulness practices with children. First of all, I'd encourage you, as you see here on the slide, to keep it brief and focus on repetition. Repetition is our friend, we could say, when it comes to mindfulness with children. There's a program called Mind Up, for example, mindfulness program for elementary students. And it's really fascinating. The curriculum involves just 3 minutes of mindfulness practice 3 times a day, every day. So with younger students, we can remember that even though the frontal lobe is developing at an astonishing clip in those early childhood years, we can remember that their attentional abilities are very much still in development. Younger children also benefit from mindfulness exercises that involve some kind of movement, some kind of activity, play. Developmentally, I'm sure you all know, as educators, play is so important for children. It's the language of children, the way they express themselves, their interior lives. Play supports their development cognitively as they work with their imagination and creative thought. Socially, as they generate play scenes with other children, they problem solve, they take turns. Emotionally, authors have said there's something like free association that happens when children play because what they're thinking and feeling bubbles to the surface and is made manifest in the way that they're playing and in their use of symbols. So it's also, I think, very significant to note that there's a great opportunity to honor diversity and inclusion in play because all children play in one form or another, and play can be used strategically to bring children together who might not otherwise interact. And then thirdly, in terms of general recommendations, we want to find ways to involve peers and involve families. Those of you who are teachers, you might remember Vygotsky's theory of childhood development emphasizing the social nature of human development, that children need dialogue, they need scaffolding, they need levels of support from others as they learn new skills. So we want to think about how can we connect students with other students as we do mindfulness, but also knowing that those students might model mindfulness to them, and also connect students with their families around these topics. There's a program called the Kindness Curriculum, and as part of it, teachers introduce a breathing meditation where students blow on a pinwheel. So they actually have that prop as part of the exercise. And they practice in class blowing on a pinwheel to get into a mindfulness of breathing exercise. And then the teacher actually sends these pinwheels home with the child and asks the parent or caregiver to help the child start each day with a few minutes of breathing with the pinwheel. So really good example, I think, of involving others, being really strategic to add that social dimension to the child's development of mindfulness. All right, so let's have some fun together. We have plenty of time to work through some of these activities, mindfulness practices with children. I'd encourage you to join if you're comfortable joining. Unfortunately, I can't see you. I can only see Jesse, so I'm going to hope Jesse joins me as well in this video. But I want to encourage you to get the full effect here, to do these yourselves. I'll walk you through. And some of them, I can't actually see you on the screen, but you're invited to stand up at times, you'll see in the way that I'm guiding through this practice. So first of all, I wanted to share with you some breathing exercises that have this playful spirit, that have a focus on movement. And turtle breaths is one of my favorite that I like to introduce with children. And the idea is that with each inhalation, you lift your shoulders to your ears and then let your shoulders drop with each exhalation. So it looks like this, and I'd invite you to join me for a few breath cycles. Breathing in, pull up the shoulders to the ears, and as you breathe out, just let the shoulders drop with the exhalation. So breathing in, breathing out, almost like a turtle, extending the neck from the shell and then retracting the neck. So breathing in. I personally tend to carry my stress in my neck and shoulders. So for me, this one is actually has quite a strong felt quality as I let the shoulders drop with each exhalation. I notice that relaxing sensation that comes with that shift. I think for this exercise, it's really, in terms of the benefits, it's really about helping students get back into their bodies, bringing attention to their breath cycles, but also those muscle groups around the neck and shoulders where many of our students, like me, will carry their stress and their tension in the body. So it can have that calming effect quite naturally to actually tense up those muscles with the inhalation and then just let them drop and go loose, relax, almost dropping a little bit more of their anxiety with each exhalation as the shoulders fall loosely. And in fact, when I've introduced this one in the classroom and followed up with teachers later, they've told me that, and this is exactly what we'd want, that they notice students doing the turtle breaths before a spelling test or before something that makes them nervous to help them calm down. So it becomes for them an additional resource for that self-regulation. The next one, which has an even more playful element, is called, as you see here, superhero breaths and superheroine. Children, of course, have some recognition of superheroes like Wonder Woman and Spider-Man. And many of these heroes and heroines have the power of sending something like a web or a lightning bolt out of their hands. And so this one, and I use the term superhero because in the dictionary, it's listed as being gender neutral. So all-inclusive. Superhero breathing invites the student to act like a superhero and breathe in, pulling their hands. And if you'd like to join me, this is actually one of those, if you'd like to get the full effect, you can even stand up. But if you'd like to stay in your chair, as you breathe in, pull the hands into the body. And as you breathe out, see if I can be on the screen with this. So breathing in, I tend to rock back a little bit, pull in my energy. And when I breathe out, I'm going to shoot out my hands, sending my superpower to the room. So breathing in, breathing out. And I don't know if it'll work for me to stand up and still be on screen, but you can imagine how much fun we can have in the classroom with everybody, all the students standing up, having some laughter together, giving our best poses. So we can do a few more cycles of this. If you like to get out of your seat, you can breathe in, pulling in your energy, breathing out, shooting the spider webs, shooting the lightning bolts, whatever it might be. Let's do this together for a few times. We usually have a lot of enjoyment around that part as we're standing around the room. But ultimately, I want to bring the students back to their seats and have them do a more subtle form, a quieter form as we're making a transition. And so I'll ask them to come back to your seats. And now we're just going to do a simple rocking motion and just have your hands by your heart space. And with your in-breath, just pull in your energy and rock back. And with your out-breath, a very small movement with your hands. Just open your hands, send out your superpower to the classroom, lean forward with your out-breath. So let's lean back with the in-breath. Out-breath, lean forward. Smaller movements with the hand. See how small and quiet can make these movements with the hand with each breath. In-breath. In-breath. Out-breath, rocking forward. And we can do that for a few breath cycles. Greenland, in the book Mindful Child, talks about how pairing breathing with the experience of rocking can be very regulating for a child. Just as parents, of course, rock their babies to sleep on their shoulder. And Greenland makes the point that rocking basically gives us a greater sense of balance and awareness of our bodies in space, more of a sense of control over our bodies. And it can be an especially good fit for students who have difficulty sitting still. So a nice way to pair some movement activities with these breathing exercises. This next one is called Shake It Off. It's from the Mindful Education workbook. And in this one, first of all, you need plenty of space for students so that they can stand, spread their arms out widely. So I'd invite you to stand. I'm not going to stand because then I'll be half off screen. But if you'd like to stand, you can listen to my voice while you're practicing this. And let me describe it, and then we'll do it together. Oftentimes, the teacher will hold something that can rattle, like a keychain. And first, we ask the students to breathe in, and I ask students to get too tight when they breathe in their bodies. So I'll say, get too tight as you breathe in, kind of hold yourself in and tense up your muscles. And then I ask them to exhale and to shake it all out. And as they're shaking it out, the teacher can rattle the keychain, or maybe a musical instrument could come in here. And we do this for about 3 breath cycles. So let's try that together. So if you'd like to stand up, you can, but getting some space, tensing up on the in-breath, and then shaking it all out on the out-breath. Shaking out your whole body, moving yourself all around. In-breath, getting too tight and too tense. shaking it all out. Shaking out the feet, shaking out the legs, the torso. Let's try it again. In breath. Shake it all out. And then there are some modifications. Again, I usually transition with students from big, large movements to quieter, more subtle movements to help them make that transition to the next activity that we might have in the classroom. So bigger to smaller movements. So on the next modification for this one, I'm going to have them just shake out parts of the body, and I'm going to stop asking them to get too tight on the in-breath. So now I'll just say, let's all come back to our seats, or you could continue standing. And on the in-breath, just take your in-breath. You don't have to get yourself too tight. So just take that in-breath. And on the out-breath, when we shake out, let's just shake out any part of the body that you'd like. So I'm going to start with shaking my feet. So in-breath. And let's just shake out the feet. See if you can shake only the feet, everything else staying still. Now in-breath. And let's try shaking out the legs on the out-breath. Out-breath, shaking out the legs, moving those knees, moving the thighs. And you can involve the students here. Let them name a part of the body to shake out. Maybe the student says, let's shake out the arms. So just in-breath. And just the arms, everything else still. And as Rechtschaffen explains in the Mindful Workbook, this is one about helping students find a state of rest to help them relax their nervous systems in the classroom, to bring awareness to the stress that they might be feeling, how stress levels change with attention and also with movement in the body. And one addition I love is you can call freeze. And this is, again, another playful component. Call freeze at different points as students are shaking out their bodies mid-shake. The teacher can yell out freeze. You can have a designated student who gets to call out freeze. And you ask students in the moment, what are you noticing in your body? And just hear their descriptors and reinforce their descriptors, whatever it is, really reinforcing that somatic awareness of what's present for them in this present moment in the body. And then later, after they've finished a shaking movement and their bodies are still, asking them again to freeze in that stillness and notice what they're feeling in the bodies. So I think really nice recommendation there, in addition from Rechtschaffen. And then I wanted to end today on this one called Sending Friendly Wishes. And this is actually a group mindfulness activity. It's very interesting. I've noticed in reading the research on emotional regulation of children, most of the research that I've seen is about helping children down-regulate negative emotions like anger. And much less is known actually about how to help children instill positive emotions like happiness or gratitude. So as you may know, mindfulness activities many of them are actually about the installation of loving kindness and gratitude, very positive emotional states, very pro-social behaviors and states. So I wanted to describe a group intervention for you as we wrap up today, which I've used in local elementary schools. It combines a group activity of personal sharing with a compassion training exercise called Sending Friendly Wishes. I'm actually going to stop the share on this PowerPoint and I'm going to pull up for you a handout that I've developed. I'm going to send this handout to you all. This one provides a bit more detail. So let me just share my screen with this handout. Provides a bit more detail on the lesson plan for this one. I'll walk you through it. I'm just going to describe it. We're not going to have time to actually do this today. But as you'll see in the objectives, this lesson plan supports social awareness standards from the Castle domains. It's about increasing students' awareness of others' difficulties. It's about scaffolding pro-social behaviors. And as you scroll down here, the lesson plan And this one actually is really beneficial to use. Teachers can certainly do it on their own. It's another nice activity if you'd like to have a partnership with the school counselor who's kind of making rounds from class to class, or the school psychologist, to integrate some of their mental health training. But it begins with a rounds activity, each student sharing what we call a rose and a thorn. So every student, you go around the circle, everyone shares one positive aspect of their week or day, one difficult aspect of their week or day, the thorn. And the teacher names an emotion that's being shared by each student. So that's helping to support their development of emotional intelligence. You can even invite other children to reflect back that emotion, that feeling, by giving them an emotion word chart designed for children. You can Google that easily, locate those online. And then for the mindfulness related piece, the group is next invited to come up with a friendly wish, a kind wish for the person who just shared their rose and their thorn. And when I've done this one with third graders, I was just amazed at what they said to one another when it came time to sending friendly wishes. They came up with such caring expressions personalized to what the classmate had just shared. I remember one student was basically in tears during her sharing because her beloved pet had just died the day before. And another student said to her, "My dog died last year too, and I hope that you feel better." You know, just a very tender expression from one third grader to another in that heartful place of really commiserating around the loss of a beloved pet. And also in an exercise like this, a lot of opportunities for students to learn from each other, back to what we were saying about Vygotsky's theory of human development and having a social dimension. Students get to watch other students send kind wishes and actually learn from the modeling that other students are providing. And then depending on time, as you'll see in the lesson plan handout here, there are some additional pieces. You can invite students to do another round activity in the group, everyone having a chance to send a kind wish to themselves, which is a really nice training in self-compassion. You can also close by asking the group to come up with a kind wish for the whole school. And any of these elements can be posted around the room for that visual reminder of the friendly, kind wishes throughout the day. And I think one of the main strengths of this exercise, is its ability to be recycled. It's actually something that students could do every week in small groups, the lesson plan being used without any additional planning from the teacher. And actually, when you use it repeatedly, the depth of sharing, the social connections only increase with repetition over time. So this is one that I would commend to you. You might want to consider it, as I mentioned, in conversation with the school counselor, see if it dovetails with some of the interventions coming out of that department in the school. So let me pause there. I want to see if we have some questions from Jesse and also from the group.
Thanks, Trevor. Yeah, we do have some questions that came in, and I would just ask everybody who's on, if you have some questions that you've been hanging on to, now's the time. Go ahead and get those questions, preferably into the Q&A box so we can keep track of them. The first question that I saw come through asks, how important is this to be taught by a trained professional, or can teachers apply basic techniques in their classroom?
It's a wonderful question. I fully believe that teachers can, and I think these are the best models of including mindfulness in the schools, when teachers really are the leaders. It's a very grassroots effort of delivering and leading these mindfulness practices in the schools. So, as I said before, these practices with children in the schools are going to be relatively brief. So, you know, it's not like we'll be leading a 45-minute sitting meditation or something like that. That could involve and require more advanced training. We're really talking about, you know, oftentimes 3 to 5 minute Mindfulness exercises often used in transitions, from one activity to another, or from recess coming back in to the classroom, or at the start of the day as kind of a bookend ritual of how we start and end the day. So they tend to be very brief. And I think that with some grounding in our own practice, that just like we're doing today, we start to practice these exercises ourselves and feel their impact, notice the difference that they can make, and carving out even just a little bit of a moment to stop, to slow down, to pause, to experience this present moment, to develop that awareness, we can then, I think, quite effectively pass that gift on to others. And actually, I think, in the trainings that I do, my vision is that I just want to help teachers. Most of all, I want to help teachers really find comfort and facility familiarity with mindfulness, that they really understand it in their own bones and their own DNA, because
Yeah.
teachers are the ones who have the training and expertise to then deliver it and implement it in the classroom. And we have some wonderful conversations about how they've done that. But it's a partnership once we are all on the same page with what does this mean and look like in our lives, then we have that footing to really apply teachers' expertise and training to deliver it to students. And I think those are the models of the schools that are more sustainable, that are the most sustainable, when it's the teachers themselves who are driving it rather than a flash in the pan, something that maybe has been handed down to them. And the more the teachers themselves have experienced it, what I've noticed is the more motivation and excitement there is because we felt it in our own lives.
Awesome. Thank you. There was a couple of questions that are related questions that I think we have some folks coming, obviously, because us being Good Grief, that are either running grief groups of some kind, maybe via work at Good Grief or in their schools. So one of the questions was about kind of infusing mindfulness activities with a group, like a grief group. Any specific suggestions for that? And the related question was, how can you just generally use mindfulness when a student loses a parent? What do you think, Trevor?
Yeah, I appreciate that question about the intersection of mindfulness with grief work in particular. And I've done a fair amount of training and study on trauma, which is another form of loss, and certainly has grief around it as well. And I think one of the commonalities is that part of what complicates the grief experience is avoidance, is a tendency to push it away or suppress it because it feels so uncomfortable and painful. So any intervention that's gradually helping us to actually ease into our current experience, as uncomfortable as it is, actually gives us, we're remarkable, we human beings. We're just absolutely remarkable at being able to adapt to and be resilient in the face of challenging circumstances. But one of the precursors of being able to adapt and be resilient is that we actually face it and we allow our system, our nervous system, our intelligence to integrate this new state of affairs or this very challenging loss. And so that's why I think mindfulness can be a really helpful adjunct to grief work, to trauma work in clinical settings, because basically we're helping to equip individuals to stay inside of what people call their window of tolerance, where they can actually process what's happening rather than being outside their window of tolerance when they're dysregulated and therefore not really processing, but just repeating these traumatic states or these very uncomfortable states without the digestion, the integration. So it really helps that self-regulation so that we can gradually come face to face with that which is very uncomfortable and the pain, the difficulty of that loss. And so I think with children, we could think about in grief work, having some opening exercises with mindfulness, some of these activities like Shake It Out that get people into the body, some of those breath exercises that help them learn how to self-regulate when they're starting to leave their window of tolerance so that they can kind of come back to the present moment. And again, I would recommend keeping it brief and then as a supplementary tool to help facilitate some of the other interventions taking place in that group.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. It's something that we have learned to integrate into our groups, both the ones that we run, but also things that we do in the school as well. And really great tool, a great grounding technique too, when you're running kind of a group that's been very heavy and you're talking about a really difficult thoughts and emotions and things like that. And we have to maybe transition back to a classroom or whatever to kind of ground ourselves in the present moment, calm some of those emotions, that fight or flight response that can kick in and be able to transition well back to the rest of our day. So, all right, well, we are close to time. I saw that there's some other questions in there, many of which had to do with resources and things like that. So perhaps one of the ways that we could answer that question, Trevor, is I know that you have your own business. You mentioned this and do some consulting and training work. So I'm wondering if you just want to share with people some information on how they could reach out to you if they did want to engage you further or find out about more resources around this topic.
Yeah, I would really welcome those conversations. I enjoy working directly with teachers, staff at local schools, hearing what's needed at those local schools, and see if I could be of help in the design and implementation of these comprehensive social emotional learning programs. I'm going to share this PowerPoint with you all. I do have a slide toward the end of the PowerPoint. Um, have my email address here. If you'd like more information on trainings, I've done single day workshops with teachers, and then with some schools we do, multiple 6-month long regular meetings. For instance, bi-weekly meetings over a lengthier period, depending on what the school is looking for. So I'm happy to dialogue with you about some of the options to really equip the teachers with a very thorough understanding of mindfulness, and then practicing together, sharing resources about the implementation and lessons learned from that implementation. One of my other passions is to hold what we call in the small business that my wife and I run, called Cardiff Health. We offer mini retreats, online retreats. The next one's coming up Saturday, April 24th. It's a 2-hour online meditation retreat. This one's actually very much happens to dovetail nicely with this workshop today, because we're going to open up, it's really for parents and educators. We're going to open up with some practice with these similar practices to the ones we use today, mindfulness with children, take some opportunity to deepen our own practice with techniques, practices for adults, and then wrap up the experience with a group activity of compassion training that's designed for children. So it should give some resources for both our own practice as adults, but also more and more hands-on exposure to those practices for children. And I've linked our website there if you'd like more information, and be delighted to talk with any of you who would like to explore these resources further. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Trevor. And everybody, that information will be included in the email that gets sent out to you tomorrow with all of the resources from this workshop. So if you didn't catch it there, don't worry. We'll make sure that we get it to you. Last but not least, a couple of logistics as we round out our session here. If you would, we really value your feedback. If you could fill out our evaluation form, that just lets us know what you thought of the workshop, but also you can leave in there suggestions for future topics and things like that, because we're going to continue offering these webinars for free on a monthly basis. So encourage you to check that out. As always, visit our website if you're looking for more resources on grief and loss or building resilience. Lots of great free resources on there. And then finally, we do have a couple of other webinars coming up in the next couple months here. The next one will be in April on spirituality of youth facing adversity. A registration link is there. We'll be distributing these to you in the email as well. And then there's going to be one called Grief as a Color, Grief as a Feeling, Grief is Learning. What do children really know about death and grief? Donna Gaffney is going to be joining us for that one. Really excellent presenter on grief and child development. So encourage you to check those out. Thank you again, everybody, so much for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us, and looking forward to seeing you again at a webinar in the near future. And again, Trevor, thanks so much for presenting.
My pleasure. Great to be with you today. Thanks, Jesse, for the invitation.